All right, we're going to get started. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for sticking it out. I know it's a long day. Thank you for all of your engagement. We're delighted to be here. I'm Prativa Baral. For those of you who haven't met me, I'm the Deputy Director of PERL, and I have the great honor of moderating our last panel this afternoon. And it will be on misinformation and disinformation. So we've heard this term used multiple times throughout the day, and I think more broadly, many of us are questioning what it even means. There are areas, particularly in the south of the border, where using the word misinformation alone can be triggering, where funding is shut down or flagged just for doing work in this space, and that's exactly why we'll be working on that here at PERL, and we'll be talking about that this afternoon. So I think more broadly speaking, when we think about emergencies, we tend to plan for biological threats or the emergency, the acute emergency itself. But reflecting on COVID, we really weren't planned for the informational threat. And so today we'll treat mis and disinformation as a readiness problem, another pandemic, another emergency on its own, how it spreads, how it shapes real-world behavior, and what interventions measurably reduce harm while protecting trust. Just a small caveat as well to say that disinformation and misinformation is not new. We've dealt with this previously, whether it's with smallpox, the tobacco industry, climate denialism, but I think there are a couple of new elements that have exacerbated this issue, and one in particular that I'm thinking of is AI, of course. But all this to say, this is not just an informational problem. You know, these dynamics sit at the intersection of commercial determinants of health, power asymmetry, and trust. And they shape outcomes long before a crisis begins. So we're really, really delighted to be speaking about all this and more with our panelists today. Joining me on stage, we have André Picard, columnist for Globe and Mail, author of the 6 best-selling books, member of the Order of Canada. We have Kim Lavoie, behavioral scientist, Tier 1 Canada Research Chair in Behavioral Medicine at Université de Québec at Montréal. Then we have Nora Loreto, the author of Spin Doctors and a couple of other things that she's working on. And then we have Jessica Malaty Rivera, infectious disease epidemiologist and science communicator extraordinaire with hundreds of thousands of followers online. And during the pandemic, she co-led the COVID tracking project at The Atlantic. So we're really, really delighted to have so many experts with us today. Thank you all for being here with us today. So I'm going to get started with our first segment, really thinking about the information ecosystem during emergencies. And I think I'll start with you, André, and ask you, what did newsrooms get right during COVID? What worked, what didn't in terms of addressing misinformation and platforming correct information?
Yeah, I guess I'll start by saying that there's a whole vast range of media, so there's everything from excellent to abysmal, so it's hard to give an overall rating, but so I'll talk more about where I work, the mainstream or lamestream media, as some like to call it. I think overall we did well. We communicated information rapidly, maybe excessively, so there's a lot of information out there. I think what we didn't do well is more important to learn from. So what we didn't do well is we didn't deal well with uncertainty. So I think we had the same problems as science had. We didn't know how to deal with changing norms, changing information, how the virus changed. So we were always kind of a couple of steps behind. A couple of places where we failed the most, I think, is on the whole airborne question. Again, I think we were reflecting the science, but we should have been a little bit questioning. I think what I learned in COVID is we always looked to science for the answers, and suddenly they didn't have them. And we didn't really know, as people who sort of just collect information and regurgitate it, we didn't know how to deal with that. So that was very problematic. The other thing we did poorly is the issue of equity. We were kind of obsessed with publishing numbers, especially at the beginning. Here's the numbers. But where the numbers were happening was much more important. We know that, I know that we'll hear more about this from Nora, but you know, what happened in our long-term care homes was a massacre of neglect, and we didn't put enough emphasis on that. What happened in our communities of color was another disaster. We didn't put enough focus. So I think we obsessed too much with the general and not with the specifics. We did very poorly in specific communities because community journalism has kind of disappeared. So I think something like the Globe, we covered the country well, but there's no one COVID in the country. There were numerous outbreaks, and it was very, very different, and we didn't reflect that. We did it in little pockets. We did sort of great coverage of Brampton, but not the rest of the country. So that's, I think, the overall, my view of how we did, fair to middling.
Just to piggyback off of that question for you, André, again, you mentioned that the newsrooms are shrinking, and given that, what would you say is the role of journalism moving forward to combat misinformation, particularly during crises?
Yeah, I think we have to address it, talk about it more. So I think things like this are very important. We're writing more about misinformation. I think we're getting more sophisticated. There was a time not that long ago where journalism was kind of just he said, she said. We had sort of this notion of balance. We had a lot of false balance in the past. I think we're getting better at being not just reporting something because someone says it without questioning it. I think that's really important in the era of RFKs, people who say demonstrably false stuff. We have to say so. I have the privilege, I am a columnist, so I can do that much easier than the news people. But we're struggling with that in the news. How do you not give all this attention to Trump? I think we give him too much coverage, and I think we have to be a lot more, use our judgment a lot more about that. So I think that's important. I think we have to help people understand the differences between misinformation and disinformation. I'm much more concerned about the deliberate spread of falsehoods for economic gain. That's the concerning part. That mums don't want to get their kids vaccinated. I don't believe any of them want to harm their children. I don't think they're malicious. I think they need a little work. They need a little help, but all misinformation is born of disinformation, is my view, and that's what we have to tackle, is that this dirty dozen of people in the world who are spreading most vaccine disinformation, that's who we have to go after. Final thing I'll say is I think social media is really problematic. We have to, not as media, but as legislators, these are publishers. They're publishing information, and they have to be treated as publishers who have to take responsibility for it. If the Globe publishes something, we can be sued. Try suing Facebook or Instagram or X. It doesn't work. That's the problem. They're not accountable. It's actually their business model. Their business model is to spread disinformation, create fear, create anger, and get clicks. It's fundamentally their business model, and we have to start talking about that and telling people who are on social media that they're being duped.
Thanks, André. Actually, that segues really well into my next question about the platforming of the disinformation dozens and many who have very loud voices. Jessica, a question to you is on this business model trap where platforms, as André said, make a lot of money based on rage, on sowing frustration and doubt. So is it even possible to solve misinformation without destroying this current ad-based business model of the internet? And if not, who should pay for the alternative?
Ooh, that is a
small question.
I'm going to solve it in one sentence. So, there was a time when these platforms were at least partially interested in keeping these information ecosystems healthier. And I remember those times because they reached out to me and they said, hey, we see what you're doing. We'd like to front load people's For You pages and make sure that they see it. We had our own dedicated teams whenever we were experiencing issues of harassment, which was constant, and threats, which was also constant. And then there got to be a point where they said they didn't want to do it anymore. They fell on this line of, we would like to not be arbiters of truth, which was never the ask in the beginning. It was always can we keep these information ecosystems safer? Can we reduce the harm that is happening with this unregulated kind of proliferation of intentionally harmful disinformation? And at one point, I remember quite vividly, in the middle of the pandemic, they just started leaving us on red. We would reach out to them and they would just stop answering. And all of a sudden, the team that was dedicated to us for content moderation, for protecting our DMs, for helping us when we were flagging information, the team was dissolved. And so I think between a lot of these heads of these platforms being subpoenaed and having to testify before Congress, and all of them kind of getting into these very philosophical and legal conversations about what is truth, which is, again, not the question. They have kind of abdicated their role for making these places safer because of honestly capitalism. Like, there's no other answer to this. They are extremely incentivized to turn these platforms into content generation that leads to profit generation. I always describe myself as the worst kind of influencer because I've never monetized my content. I've never hid it behind paid walls. I don't do ads and subscriptions and paid sponsorships, and I've really kind of not done it the right way. And so they don't look at me as the type of content creator that would deserve the type of protection that they provided in 2020 and 2021. It's interesting, we did a research project in partnership with YouTube mid-pandemic about could there be an alternative verification system after especially the blue check became something that you can buy on all the platforms. We thought, what if there was an alternative to that where you could essentially submit your credentials, submit your reasons why you would be a trusted messenger, especially as they relate to your subject of your expertise. And maybe there was a green check that could be for people in science. Maybe there was like a blue check that was related to people in, whatever it was. We just thought, could there be a system? And it really actually got YouTube folks interested and thinking about it. Did it go anywhere? No. But it was a really interesting, at least, case study on could a platform be incentivized to help create a system for people to have better navigational tools to understand who is worthy of my trust, who is reliable, who's actually an expert. Because as Mike mentioned earlier, we were experiencing a death of expertise now with all the armchair experts that have arose and have become louder, more significant, and much more profitable.
Thanks, Jessica. I'll ask a follow-up question to that, and it'll be a hard one too, I think. Just thinking on the idea of platforms, and they exist, so we will have to deal with them moving forward. But if you had to choose between speed or accuracy, and we all know that falsehoods spread a lot faster than the truth, so would you support, for example, something like a virality speed bump, where no post, even if it's a true one, can be shared more than 100 times or 1,000 times in an hour without a manual review? So are we willing to make the internet slower to make it safe?
Personally, I would say yes, but I just don't think that would happen. It's none of these platforms would be interested in that because that's not what generates money. The more the clicks, the more eyeballs, the deeper that sensationalism, the more illicit and provocative it is. They want people to have highly reactive feelings so that causes them to click and share and forward, etc. It's how my content gets suppressed because it's not salacious and causing people to want to chuck their phone out the window or make these conclusions about something based on just a headline, not even getting to the lead. And so it's concerning to me that it's only moving faster. I would really love to pump the brakes if we could. Yeah.
Thanks. Nora, over to you. I think the big elephant in the room is the politics of misinformation and disinformation. I know that some of the work that you're working on is also fascism. I wonder if you could speak a little bit about the intersection between the rise of fascism, the spread of misinformation, and our ability to respond to crises given this environment.
Yeah, so everyone's feeling a bit more fascist these days, eh? Jesus Christ. One of the things that I thought was so interesting during the discussions, during the pandemic, the discussions around vaccines, it was almost as if from the beginning it was set up to be the war that it became. And this was, I think everyone was to blame in this, with perhaps the exception of vaccine scientists who are literally ones going like, whoa, we're doing what we can as fast as we can, give us time. But what we had in the press, what we had in popular, well, first of all, it was like we need a silver bullet for this to go away because we're all locked down and the lockdowns have to end and we need a vaccine. And I remember watching the narrative spin out like, well, but who would even take it? Like as early as April, would you take a vaccine, Canadians? And then the headline was like, some number of Canadians won't even take a vaccine. And it's like, there is no vaccine. What the hell are you talking about, right? At that point, we were a year away from that. And so being primed in that way allowed for when in 2022, what emerges is the Freedom Convoy, the trucker convoy. Anyone lived in Ottawa through that? Yeah. We had it in Quebec City for 2 days. I got lots to say about how those two cities managed that a bit differently. But it became a basin of everyone's anger who was mad about the circumstances that they were experiencing. And so it really was finally a place where you could be critical. And of course, it was critical and far right, unfortunately. And I remember, talking to people within the labor movement and saying, like, we have to be critical to what the government is doing. I mean, I tried to get an article published. I think I started with the Globe. They were like, no. I think I went to Maclean's. I said no. When the first measures came in to help people based on salaries, and I said, well, this is also reinforcing gender inequality in salary because we've got inequality with our salaries. Men are going to make more money off of pandemic benefits. And it was like, are you crazy? We need this money. Why are you? I actually, right, it was the National Observer was like, we're relying on this money. You can't publish that, right? There was no ability to be critical, which allowed for the far right to grab that. And it made sense why there was no ability to be critical, because everyone wanted to believe that the politicians were being driven by the science and the science was being driven by the research. And to some extent, that was how it was happening, except there were so many unknowns. And so when you stifle the ability to have some sort of a critique that's a left-wing critique, because most of the left-wing institutions like unions, maybe we can call universities that, although questionable, were very much supporting what the government of all stripes were doing to some extent in the start, that pushes people towards being critical on the right. And we never really dealt with that. I remember being so mad about the convoy because I live in downtown Quebec City and they were honking and honking and honking. I was losing my mind. And someone knocks on my door and I thought, oh my God, who's on my door? And it was a friend of mine and he said, how you doing? It's a nightmare out there. I'm like, I know, I hate these people. I want them to be launched into the sun. And he says, but isn't it beautiful to see the streets full of people? And I was like, God damn it, it's beautiful. Because it is beautiful. Isn't it beautiful to see people like coming out safely outside in a pandemic to be like that? And it was at the same time as Carnival, which is Carnival being like, we're crazy. We're going crazy at Carnival this year, with another carnival happening at the same time. So I think the fascism is going to be on the rise whenever you have a week left, and we have the weakest left that we've probably ever had in Canada. Fascism is going to be on the rise when you have income inequality, as we have never experienced before in the history of Canada, and unfortunately that's where we are.
A lot there. Thanks, Nora. We'll shift gears a little bit and talk about the people and the community piece that Nora mentioned. And so, Kim, my question to you is more about the behavior and the compliance side of things. So when we think about public health emergencies or emergencies more broadly, there's a lot of restrictions, there's a lot of rules. When people don't comply, and when we're thinking about susceptibility to misinformation, what's most often underneath it? Is it confusion? Is it identity, fatigue, distrust, economics? What are we dealing with here?
Great, thank you so much. And before I start, I just want to say congratulations, Joanne, Prativa, incredible panels today. I can't believe I'm sitting up here on the stage with this incredible panel and everyone else that's spoken before me. No one else could do this but you. So thank you so much. All right, so back to the big question. So I'm a behavioral scientist. I'm a clinical psychologist by training. Is there anyone else that is a clinical psychologist in the room? Behavioral scientist, maybe a person? All right. So one thing I find we haven't talked a lot about today is the human side of the pandemic. We've talked about inequality, we've talked about impacts, we've touched upon it. But one of the things that struck me, and I come from a world where historically I've worked in the chronic disease prevention space. But basically I'm an expert in behavior change. If you want to change, you want your kids to do their homework, you want your husband to pick up his socks, you want your municipality to take up the garbage, whatever it is, you want your systems to change, your politicians to change, give me a call. Because at the end of the day, and sometimes people don't like this when I say this, but people are predictable. And I'm not saying we're here to manipulate, no. But you need to know sort of the recipe for behavior change. And at multiple levels in the pandemic, and that's what made myself and a few of my colleagues get involved, is I woke up in mid-March after spring break in New York City, where we didn't get COVID, but we were quite aware of what was happening. And then I got home and I turned around with my husband in bed, who we worked together, Simon Bacon. I'm like, shit, I think we need to do something here. I think the world is going to need help mobilizing the world, the global population, to do things that they've never done at a speed that they've never fathomed. And I said they're going to be scared. Uncertainty is going to be a big problem. Vaccines are a year or two at best away. I said behavior change and adopting prevention measures on a global scale is going to be the way to go. And he's like, Kim, we don't have time. And I'm like, I know. But I said, I think we need to make time. And so here I am. And so what I've learned is that I'm going to give you Behavior Change 101. And we'll loop back. People are motivated for two things: to get good things and avoid bad things. So people aren't that difficult to understand. But there's basically 4 things that you need to do to change human behavior at any level, individuals through to policymakers, decision makers, politicians, because they're hard to believe sometimes, but they're human too. And before I say that, I'm going to say, one of the problems with the question, Prativa, is that you ask me, how do you get people to comply? That's the first problem. You don't, okay, if you know anything about humans. So raise your hands, who likes to be told what to do? I've asked that question to about 25,000 people around the world, as far away as Japan and India, Australia, South America. No one raises their hands. Why? Because it's a fundamental human need to be autonomous, to be self-driven, okay? And we get our backs up when people tell us what to do, even when we, in theory or in principle, agree with whatever it is they're telling us what to do, okay? And if I were to ask you, how does it feel when someone tells you what to do? What would you tell me? Give me a feeling. Anything. Bad? Annoying, frustrated?
Anger.
Anger? Any of those emotions, we talked about emotions before, sound motivating to you? It's because... Yes, but in the wrong direction, right? It makes you angry and it builds resistance. So the first message is, we don't aim for compliance. In my world, we aim for something called adherence, which is the same. We still want people to do things, but the reason why they'll do it is very different. And it's because they agree with whatever it is we're trying to get them to do. There's sort of this principle that we adhere to in medicine called informed consent. It's the same thing in a population world. And the more we treat people like they're idiots and they don't know, we've lost our greatest asset in sort of mobilizing the world to face the next health emergency. And that is up there in our ivory towers deciding what everybody needs to know and when, and we don't tell the truth and we're not transparent. And guess what? We build this thing called distrust, and no one trusts anything that we say because we ignore our greatest asset, which is the people. They have the solutions more than we have the solutions. And as you said, I think it was André, you said, everybody's pandemic is different. So everybody's solution is going to be a little different. They're going to have their own flavor, their own things that are going to work. So I think that, I'll loop back quickly to answer sort of the 4 things. I said, there's 4 things you need. And you're like, what are the 4 things? So the 4 things are, to change any behavior in anyone, anywhere, is people need to be aware of the problem. They need to acknowledge there's a problem to solve, okay? And that's a pretty easy solution. You give information, okay? Education, fine. The second thing is motivation. What's motivation? It's the drive to do something because you think it's important. You think something good is going to happen to you personally, okay? Or to something you care about, your community or whatever it is. The third thing you need is capability, okay? It's not enough to know. It's not enough to care. You have to be able to do it. So making masks available, for example, making them free of charge, accessible everywhere, was a critical piece in getting people to wear masks. And the fourth thing is you need to create opportunities to act. So you need knowledge, yes, agree on the problem. You need to care. You need to have capabilities or be able to do it. And the system needs to create opportunities. And that's the recipe for change that can be applied to anyone, anywhere, including our decision makers.
Thank you, Kim. So we'll actually segment.
Yes. Yeah. I'd love to meet Mark Carney. He's cool. He's cool. I think he's cool. He's been doing some cool things last week. Come on, ladies, you know what I'm talking about.
There's actually an entire Instagram channel about this, apparently.
I know. That's amazing. Oh my God, I know. Inside joke. Guys are like, what are they talking about? It's okay.
So we'll segue into solutions that Kim really beautifully set us up for. André, maybe I'll go over to you and think about what do you think is a single newsroom practice that would most reduce harm during crises and build trust? Whether it's speed, correction, sourcing, headlines, context, what do we need to do to restore the trust that's been broken?
I think a couple of things. One is, I think we have to take a breath, right? I think there was too much rapidity. We live in this new ecosystem where, like, it used to be called journalism, so based on the word jour, daily, and now it's kind of minutalism, right? We have to feed the beast every second. And that was always my message in the newsroom, because I'm old-fashioned, like, just take a breath. Nobody's going to say, oh, you publish this at 5:05 instead of at 4:52. Right? Nobody cares. So we have to slow down. So I think, to me, that's the single biggest one. I think on a broader scale, I think what we learned from COVID is an important role of the media has to be this bridge between science and politics. Something we've heard about all day, that you can have the best science in the world and it doesn't matter if it's not politically palatable. So I think that's a large part of our role, is to say, oh, this is a great policy, a great idea, but here's why we can only do half of it. And maybe we can do the other half later, but you have to go at the speed of the people. You can't force things down their throat, because then there's the reaction. So I think that going forward, I hope that's what we do much better, is this bridging.
Thanks, André. Jessica, you are based in the United States. We've seen federal agencies being hijacked with regards to information, or health information, or information more broadly. What would you tell a country like Canada, or more broadly, what is the solution here with respect to structural, massive damage to that scale?
You know, I was so thrilled to get the invitation to be part of this, and it also broke my heart, because I've been in this space for 25 years now, working in biosurveillance and pandemic detection and, science communication and sense making, and thought, surely one of the after products of COVID-19 would be creating centers like this across multiple universities. I remember people would ask me, why wasn't there a system that could detect early indicators and warnings of pandemics? And I said, well, there was one. I worked at it at Georgetown many, many years ago. And then it got defunded because public health is expensive, because public health, when it works, is not quite visible to many people. When people are not dying in mass, and when data is just being collected on people just existing and living, it's very hard to show the ROI. And I think that this revenge tour that we're kind of seeing with the administration, that is lashing out very, very violently and targetedly to scientists and science infrastructure and universities that work on this research, is going to be something that will take decades to recover from. And so keep going. Right? I hope that PERL is a reproducible model. I hope that PERL can be something that can be in every university in Canada, in every university in Europe, and one day, again, I hope, in every university in the United States. I mean, I'm not leaving yet, but it's something that keeps me up, thinking about the effects of our knowledge in the United States. I think that there is a very real brain drain that is happening. I think that there's a very real erosion in confidence that the U.S. can be a global leader and a pillar of public health. I mean, for years we would say, as deeply flawed as the CDC is, it is still the gold standard. It is still the premier public health agency in the world. And we can't say that anymore. And that is something that I hope in my lifetime can be said again. But I just fear that we're going to have to look elsewhere. And that's what we're doing. We're creating alternative reference lists. Like we're telling people not to go to cdc.gov for these references. We're telling people to go to these universities, to the American Academy of Pediatrics, to PERL most likely very soon when these resources are on the website. And I hate to say that, but it is the reality. But I can't. I am here to support this, and I'm so thrilled that it's existing, because it's what we should be doing in the U.S., and we're not.
Thanks, Jessica. On that note, Nora, thinking about solutions. So in your book, Spin Doctors, you talk about the concept of pandemic journalism and crisis narratives being manufactured. Can you speak a little bit more about that and what the solutions are to combat?
Yeah, in this whole drive to have a narrative that is complete and that people feel good when they read because there's a beginning and an end, a pandemic doesn't fit into that at all. And that's a real challenge because in addition to the rapidity of the stories having to come out very quickly, there is a pressure on journalists just because we're storytellers. There's a self-pressure often to tell a story and to have a story that has kind of a beginning and a middle and the end. And that's not possible during a pandemic. And no one really, like in Canada, I mean, people may have lived through other kind of health crises, but we'd never lived through anything like this. And there wasn't enough diversity in the coverage because, I mean, we lost something like 3,000 journalists from like 2020 to 2023 in Canada, right? There's like the amount of media that we have was constricting. And so what we did have was very, very narrow because it's just, like the Globe and Mail can't do all of the journalism in all of Canada. That doesn't make sense. It was never set up to do that. And so if we're thinking about solutions, key to what we understood in the pandemic, there are certain flashpoints that we can all kind of think about the journalism that was done. You have, of course, Aaron Durfell at the Montreal Gazette was the first real reporter who was focusing on long-term care in Montreal. That set a certain standard for reporting within long-term care, but it also would never have been possible if the Montreal Gazette had fewer staff and didn't have a health reporter, right? How many health reporters do we have in Canada now? 5, maybe? Like only? I don't think I'm exaggerating there. And so like that, we have to invest in beats. We have to invest in journalism. And, I look at the work that I did. I mean, talking about not monetizing your content creation. Like I wasn't paid to do 6 hours of work every single night for 2 years to track deaths in this country. No one paid me. No one barely interviewed me. Right? I honest to God, did 20 interviews in 2 years about my work. I don't know why. When people doing similar work were being interviewed 16 times a day, right? There's the capacity that we have to be able to do this kind of work is very limited. And so newsrooms, I think, have to think about working with freelancers, turning on like freelancers when you need that extra help. That never happened, which I thought was very surprising and strange. But ultimately, when you're in the process, in the business of making money, you're not necessarily thinking about how can you have the broadest coverage possible, making sure everyone's informed, because ultimately our news is by and large for-profit news, and that does also cut to some of the problems that we experience.
Thank you, Nora. So we'll move to the next segment where I will present a scenario, and you will be given 45 seconds each to answer each of these rounds. So please solve misinformation in 45 seconds. So we're going to take a case and see what you think are potential solutions here, because I think often when we think about misinformation, it's this big concept and we throw a lot of terms. So we're going to try to get a little bit more tangible into some potential solutions above and beyond what's already been mentioned. So the case is there is a wildfire. And there's a rumor that's been circulating. Air quality index is manipulated, the masks and filters are harmful, the officials are hiding the truth. It's hour 6 of this wildfire, so think of the LA wildfires from a little while ago. And let's say the ER visits are rising and there's a ton of misinformation on Reddit, TikTok, full of these claims, and a few local leaders amplify it. So a bit of a flashback, I think, from COVID and from other emergencies we've seen. So round 1, what do you do, given all of your different expertise, immediately in the first 24 hours? I'm going to start with you, André.
Yeah, I think you cover the wildfire like a breaking news, and you get as much information out as possible. You talk about the air quality index, but I think you kind of ignore the doubters at that point, and then later you come back to address their concerns.
Kim?
Yeah, so I agree with Andre. I think the goal is to get agreement that there's a problem to solve, like I mentioned before. And I would agree that you want to get images out there that are hard to believe your eyes, so hard to dispute. And if there's an issue with air quality causing health problems, I mean, think about the things that made us react during the pandemic, those images of New York City, of early Italy, right? People stacking up in the ER. And I would refrain from immediately starting to tell people what to do. I think the first step in the immediate is to get people's attention, and we know emotions do that. If it's good enough for Facebook, it's good enough for public health. And I think we need to get as much credible source information out there as possible. Images, I think a good image is worth 1,000 words.
Jessica?
Say what you know, say what you don't know. I think there's a lot of filling in the gaps of what could be and the solutions and what you should do, and instead you state the facts, you explain that there's a problem, you anticipate the concerns and the questions, and even answer them by saying, we don't know these things yet, we are looking to find them. That is a form of information inoculation or pre-bunking, right? You're anticipating what people might go to, which is panic buying, panic moving. I'm from Los Angeles, so this is very close to home. The idea of evacuation order versus warning was extremely confusing to people, and it's because they just read those words and assumed that they were synonyms, and so it's explaining kind of what's going on and what's not going on.
Nora?
Yeah, I mean, in addition to all of that, I would be looking for people on the ground who I know and who I have relationships to tell me, what are you experiencing, what are you hearing, what's it like, to then either write about what they're experiencing or to see how similar or different the information is from whoever they are in their realities.
Great. So now let's do round 2 when we're talking about the next 2 weeks. So here, I think we're thinking more about rebuilding trust, more long-term support and response. André?
I think then you get a little more sciencey, and you start. Here's how the air quality index works. Here's some doubts people have. Here's why these doubts are not legitimate, or they are. So I think you focus more on factual stuff than.
Kim?
Yeah, no, I agree with André. And I think one of the things that the public needs is they need information on which to make informed decisions. Okay, and I think during the pandemic, I don't think we did a great job at teaching people how to navigate that information, how to interpret that information, and what do I do with this information and when. So I think you need to make behavioral targets specific and measurable and feedback often. And the last thing I'll say quickly is that at this stage, and sort of stage 2, is you want to start giving people menus of options, because you can't raise the alarm and not provide solutions, because that does induce panic. So you need to convey that there are solutions and you want to empower people to act.
Jess?
I want to say to bring the human part of the conversation into the room, because we've talked about this multiple times today. Emergencies do not affect people equally. They're not equalizers. They're just not. We have different communities zip code is one of the leading indicators or clues on outcomes, right? So we know that places will fare worse than other places. And so I would make sure that whatever resources we are giving folks are tailored to their communities. It is not a one-size-fits-all on even how to interpret the information, on where to get the resources. So bringing in the human aspect of that with a lot of empathy and a focus on mutual aid.
Nora?
Yeah, I'd be looking to see who's calling the shots at that point at 2 weeks. Who's the buck stopping with, and who's actually deciding what needs to happen? Is that the place that should be deciding it? Has there been a failure in some sort of other kind of management in this situation? And then often, because we're talking about evacuations, how much input does the local community have on what is happening to them, or are they just being moved around by Ottawa, right? Which is something that, of course, is going to create a lot more distrust in a situation than if it's being coordinated locally with the appropriate experts.
Amazing, thanks. So hopefully that gave us a couple of more tangible actions that we can all think about when we're thinking about misinformation, disinformation. Something that's come up quite a few times over the course of this conversation is the concept of uncertainty. So I'd love to hear your take on how we navigate that, particularly during emergencies. How should journalists cover uncertainty? How should academics cover uncertainty or respond to it? How should public health agencies do that? André, I'll start with you.
I think we start by acknowledging that it exists. But I don't think we've done that very well in the past. When I go around, when I often speak to medical students, I tell them the 3 most important words in medicine are, I don't know. And I think it's the same is true in public health. I think there's a reluctance to say that. This is what we know today, but this is what we don't know. I think we don't do enough of that. I think there's a feeling that if you do that, you're going to look like, oh, I don't know everything, I'm not smart. But I think the reality, and I think research shows this, is that people find that comforting. They find it comforting to say, yeah, they're human, they don't know. I don't know either. This is okay, and then they'll pay more attention. So I think we have to be more vulnerable, if I could put it that way, and say, there's all kinds of things we don't know, and hopefully, and here's what we're going to do to learn them.
And I think also appreciating different types of expertise, right? To your point earlier, Jessica, about armchair epidemiologists popping up. What is knowledge and what is expertise? And where should you step back and give the space for other folks? Jessica?
You know, I think that when you say, I don't know, I do think it's a trust building thing. We have done a number of focus groups and surveys to understand how people perceive information and what were memorable moments of messages and communication during the pandemic. And there were a few things that stood out to me. And one of them was how angry and how immediately checked out people became when a message changed. Mm-hmm. And that's where you can prevent that from happening by saying, we don't know yet. People often refer to the guidance being flip-floppy and to one day it was this and one day it was that. When we could have gotten ahead of that and say, this is an evolving situation. We are basing this on the data that we have today. We might change our recommendation based on X, Y, Z. And instead people look at that as, that is not trustworthy. That is politicians. That is some other incentive that feels sinister. And then the other thing too is that humans are just really bad at interpreting risk because it is so personal and it is so subjective. And if we can help with risk communication in particular to help people understand, again, giving them navigational tools to understand how to perceive that and make informed choices for themselves and their communities, it would be a lot easier when things do have to change. And then the risk mitigation would have to change as well.
Kim?
Yeah, so I love uncertainty. And just to say, it's certainty is the opposite of that, and certainty doesn't exist. Mm-hmm. So doesn't stop humans from being universally driven to seek it out. And we're universally uncomfortable with uncertainty, and it's at the basis of many pathologies and anxiety disorders. So I agree about certainty and trust. And I agree that what we need to do is be transparent. And I know that when I'm speaking to people or even patients, you have to say, you know, this is what I know and this is what I don't know, transparently, and acknowledge that that's uncomfortable. But when I tell them, but you know what, as soon as I know, you're going to know, right? And you're kind of coming down to their level, or you're bringing them up to yours. But the bottom line is you convey this spirit of collaboration and mutual trust. You're building mutual trust. We talk about trust like they need to trust us. It goes both ways. And being honest and transparent is us trusting them, not treating them like children and that don't know and that need to be, guided and told what to do. They don't always. All right, everybody knows about what to do and not to do with regards to health behaviors. That's not the problem, all right? So I think that the concept of certainty and trust is completely interwoven. Certainty doesn't exist, and it's about expectation management, I think, Jessica, is what you're referring to. So critical, and I think that was the problem, and you're right. People rejected changes in the message because they weren't expecting it. They were set up to believe that this is it. You only need one dose. Oh, no, actually, now you need two. Oh, now actually. And it's just, I'll end with just a quick metaphor. It's like asking the population to run a marathon. But I don't know what speed, but speed up this week. Oh, no, slow down this week. Yeah, but how long do I have to run? I don't know. Where's the finish line? I don't know. Oh, no, the finish line is here. And then a week later, oh, no, it's over there. Oh, no, where's the finish line? Well, actually, I don't know now where the finish. You can't manage humans this way, okay? They'll just disengage, and Jessica said it beautifully. And if a surefire way to disengage your population is to not acknowledge that there's uncertainty, but you'll know as soon as I know, and we're in this together.
If I could just add one quick thing to that and just say, we've got to move on from some of the language that science has been using. So like these catchphrases that are just meaningless now. Trust the science, trust the experts, vaccines work. I mean, what does that even mean? We're talking about something as if it is the binary, and like you said, there isn't even certainty in that. You eliminate the fact that there is risk in vaccines. There really is.
If there was so much certainty in scientists, we wouldn't have this thing called hypotheses and research grants.
Exactly.
Gosh, right?
Yes.
We knew all the answers. We all had to have a job.
Well, that's why we don't have them in the U.S. anymore.
No,
because
exactly. So what's the point, right?
Yeah.
So what's the
we
point?
solved
can invent
all the
truth.
problems. We answered all the questions.
Someone can be, yeah.
Nora.
Yeah, I feel like yes, it's everything that people have said. I want to come at it from a bit of a different perspective. We also don't know very much because of the data regime in Canada. We do not have good data on anything. Right? Like compared to the United States, like the United States knows a lot about its people. We, in the early days, were relying on a lot of proxy understandings of what was happening from when the data being collected in the United States. How COVID was impacting racialized communities mostly was, it's happening in the US, they have data, we can see it, we don't. It must be like that here though, because the conditions are so similar. So yes, uncertainty is always there, but we do not do ourselves any favors with how little data we collect. And of course, the federal government's cutting 850 people from StatsCan so we can pay for the military. These are the decisions that are being made right now, which we absolutely need to be critical of. But in this moment of uncertainty, if we're thinking of uncertainty, if we're thinking of March 2020, there's a front page article from Maclean's that announced that Canada was the second best prepared country in the world for pandemics. And the first was the United States. Okay?
How did that turn out?
Right? And this is stuff that you've all probably maybe saw and then have like this memory hole because no one wants to go back to those days. This is why now I have to plug my book. Go buy my book. It's all in there. Because I was writing at the time, and when I did the audiobook for my own book, I read it for the first time in a year, and I was like, Jesus Christ, I forgot all of that, right? And so in uncertainty, yes, but we were being told that we are on this, we got this, everything we need to do is right. And this is why. And as of course, all of those, everything that we thought was true has just disappeared. And that just obliterated the trust that people had in what was going on.
Prativa, can I add something too?
Of course.
So I didn't actually finish and say what we ended up doing, my husband and I, when I rolled over in bed and said we had to do something. So we did do something, and we did launch something called the Eye Care Study, which ended up being one of the largest data collection, why I said, maybe this is a good time to mention it, and knowledge transfer platforms in the world. 180,000 participants in over 200 countries with a lot of Canadian data, not a lot of American data because they have their own data and we didn't need to fill that gap. And we're still going and partnering, of course, with Joanne and PERL, and we're so fortunate and for the support of the Canadian government. And so we're going to continue this along with some other teams, including one by run and certainly spearheaded by Carolyn Quash as well. But so we're going to help fill those gaps soon enough.
Thanks, Kim. I'm also reflecting on, I think often we tend to focus on the US versus Canada binary, and that's very flawed. We have our own issues here, as Nora pointed out. But one thing that I'm reflecting on is our GPHIN, the public health, the GFIN, and the fact that it was reduced quite substantially right before the pandemic hit, and it was such a global surveillance platform. So a lot of work for us to do here. I think I have 15 minutes. Oh, excellent. Okay, so one of the questions we are at McGill, and so one of the questions that I'm thinking about and reflecting quite a bit is, what is the role of academic institutions in all of this? Jessica talked about the threats. Should there be incentives for academics to be doing this work? Because right now it's not really incentivized, nor is it valued necessarily. Should it speak up? What is the role of academic institutions to combat this massive erosion of trust and misinformation more broadly? I'll start with Kim.
I'll start because I already have an answer to that. Really quickly, I think academic institutions like McGill, and we're a great university town here in Montreal, have a responsibility to create a safe space to do this work, to have the discussions, to have this kind of meeting. So bravo McGill and Joanne for leading. And I think we absolutely have to make sure our institutions remain politically agnostic and separate. And I think, we've seen that a lot of public health and a lot of the stuff that happened during the pandemic, there's a lot of policy that was politically influenced. And I think the space that we have here is the space that should be protected for scientists and the public and all the collaborators and partners that come together to have open and safe conversations about what needs to be done moving forward.
Thanks, Kim. André?
I just reiterate that be a place for nonpartisan debate because you can't have that anywhere else anymore.
Jessica?
I wish it was that easy for me to answer, because even if a university, I won't even name a university, even if a university remains apolitical and doesn't have overt policy positions, the research is being politicized by the people who are looking at it. And if the people who are looking at it are going to put those things on banned word lists and therefore cut the funding of those research projects, academia is no longer free. Academia becomes a tool of the government. And I am very afraid, as an academic myself, of the precedent that has been set in the last couple years about what can even be researched. You know, a lot of universities, Hopkins included, are very reliant on federal funding. And there are a lot of other organizations, foundations alike, who are making decisions on whether or not they will continue funding universities based on the actions of the government. And that is a scary place to be, because I do think academia has a very important role in shaping the research, in creating the literature and kind of the standards in a lot of the things that we are talking about. But I think it's going to go backwards in the US, unfortunately, because of what's happening in the last couple of years.
Nora?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, I live with a scientist, I live with a chemist. Actually, I can't say that in Quebec. He's technically not a chemist in Quebec. That's a long story for people who are from Quebec. I think that the role that the university plays in basic research in the sciences is so fundamental. And I think that it is actually severely under attack in Canada. We don't see the attack because it's harder to see that students are not necessarily enrolling in basic science. Basic science is very difficult. And so aside from students going into it to become doctors or dentists or high professional positions, there isn't much of a future if you want to just be a researcher, because the private sector doesn't do very much research and development in this country. And so in addition to, of course, being a place of debate and a place where we can share ideas, and academics have to take the tribune and they have to be critical, you have academic freedom, you have an office and a job, my God, I wish I had those. But in addition to all of that, I actually think we need to be talking a lot more about basic research and how the commercialization push that destroyed the academy in so many ways, the neoliberal university of the 2000s and 2010s, has resulted today in a real crisis of basic research. And then who are the students that are filling those roles? They're international students. And what do we say to them? We hate you, go home, right? Like, then there's the whole racism part that's really destroying the curiosity-based research that is the engine for any economy that wants to compete globally right now.
Thanks, Nora. I think we have 10 minutes left. So before we ask the audience for questions, I wanted to do a quick lighting round of questions. So I'll say one statement and then please answer in 20 seconds. One myth or misinformation that you would retire forever. I'll start with you, Kim.
Sure. That all we need to do is tell people what to do.
André?
That it's easy to communicate science information. It's a lot harder than we admit.
Yes, very much so. Jessica?
That trust should be assumed and that we should not work on repairing trustworthiness.
Nora?
That it's possible to not get sick.
All right, also true. Thank you to the four of you for an incredible panel. We'll be taking questions from the audience. We have 9 minutes, I believe, so plenty of time. I see I see many hands. Yeah. So I'll take all of the ones on the left, and then we'll do a second round right after.
One thing that I remarked quite peculiarly about the comments that were made today is that a lot of the suggestions were backward-looking because, for one reason and one alone, we're not taking into consideration the impact of generative AI on decision making and the processes that will impact the public perception going forward, whether it be for a tsunami or whether it be for another pandemic, maybe Nipah, or whether it's for a forest fire or climate crisis. There will be many more experts in the room going forward, people who will draw conclusions based on the generative AI. And on top of that, there's another layer. There will be many more agents preferring disinformation, and these will be set off by the same actors that we were describing, the same large companies that are trying to drive media. Grok will be one of those participants. So in that sense, one theme that I picked up on as being very important is connecting the public to the basic science, because there are many layers of opacity, and we have to try to deconstruct them first before we make something sensible. Underlying the basic science, unfortunately, are the funding agents, the DoD, DOEs, NSF, NIH of the world. They always have their agendas, and unfortunately that makes the researcher a less useful tool than they should be. And then the second layer, unfortunately, are the public policy organizations that have to translate what the researchers derive to the doctors, and the doctors communicate it to the public, meaning the media, and then the media to the, the individual, a general individual who has not had any of the scientific background impressed upon him in his K through 12 education, let alone in university. And that's where I see the lack of understanding here. So in order to prevent ourselves from being victims of media manipulation, pharmaceutical companies, as well as future agents in the AI sector, what initiatives does the panel here propose to connect the public, those individuals who should be better informed, with the basic science, so that they can make more informed decisions, so that they don't go helter-skelter? And the second part of the question is, how do we equip these individuals with the tools of artificial intelligence to prognosticate, to help themselves prepare for eventualities, for different scenarios that might occur, even before a crisis spins up? Those are my questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So use of AI, pros and cons, and how it can be used to combat misinformation. Thank you. Another question? Yes.
Hi, panel. Thank you so much. My question is about our ability to regulate social media companies. So as Jessica said, a number of years ago, there was some effort to increase the visibility of reputable scientists and generally suppress misinformation online, but that has changed, and now oligarchs treat the internet like the Wild Wild West with zero repercussions. So my question is, how do we reintroduce that hesitation on the part of companies from spreading misinformation? Is it, as Andre said, treating these companies as publishers in a legislative sense, or any other solutions?
AI, social media. Okay, one last question. Yeah.
Hi, I guess if traditional media still matters, I'm wondering if solutions like in Belgium, they have the cordon sanitaire, where you can't have like far-right speakers speak live on television. I don't know if we can do that can that kind of solution be applied in this context of crisis and pandemics?
All right. Nora, do you want to start?
Yeah, I think there has been no planning in our media ecosystem in this country for a very long time. And the fact that the internet is not public in the way that the airwaves were made public when we first created radio broadcasting, I think is a crisis. I would love to see a Canadian social media that builds in accounts for all of the media platforms in Canada, so you can go in and then you can opt out of what you don't want and build your social media that way. I don't think it's in the realm of possibility to rein in the Metas or the Twitters of the world. And unfortunately, it's only going to get worse. I think generative AI is going to make it far worse and far more difficult. And so what we need in Canada is, like, we're talking about sovereignty, right? We're talking about sovereignty and sovereignty and sovereignty. And so let's imagine, what are we going to do? We're going to fight the American military when they invade us. our military is going to beat their military. This is the only credible thing that continuously gets talked about. It's like, no. We need to build internal capacity, culture, language exchange, and trust amongst Canadians themselves to know that when the metas of the world want us to descend into disinformation, or when generative AI wants us to believe the wrong thing, we still have our North Stars within our own cultures. We know who to trust. I think Canadians really do want that. I think the history of Canadian culture shows that we are very proud with what we can create. I keep hearing about this heated rivalry thing, not my thing. Television, I don't watch it, but it just shows that like we still have some ability to do good stuff, but it requires really intense investment. And that's the only way that we're going to have the platforms, because when we need what was the first thing that happened with the pandemic arrives, all of a sudden the newspapers media, they actually became the message box of what we were supposed to do. We turned on CBC to figure out what the hell we're supposed to do. They started to be the voice of the government because it was an emergency situation. We need those pieces set up in advance now, because if an emergency happens and there is no CBC, or people are no longer listening to the radios, they're all getting their news from TikTok, then we don't even have the traditional levers to be able to push through information to people.
I agree that some of these platforms are just untamable beasts at this point. I saw an ad just yesterday of the Substack CEO saying, if you're worried about free speech, come over here, you can say whatever you want. Which I'm like, oh, that's a really weird message to share. It's one of the reasons why I was a reluctant adopter to Substack, because that's where a lot of the contrarians were going to amass their large and very lucrative followings. And so I think that we're kind of past that point, which is why I feel like we have to recognize that the disinformation dozen, that bad actors who are obviously using generative AI as well, are intending to exhaust us. They are intending to overwhelm us so that we are just constantly drinking out of a fire hose of just too much information. So my style of this work is infodemic resilience, essentially. It's the sense making of it all. It's making the basic science make sense so that I'm giving my audience navigational tools to anticipate the potentially bad takes, the potentially intentionally manipulative messages that they might get, because I can't expect everybody to remember high school biology. But what I can do is help increase their science and data literacy skills so that they can spot a chart that looks askew, so that they can ask the who, what, when, where, why of an article and get past the lead. That's the only thing I can do, and what I'm trying to encourage my colleagues to do, and what I'm trying to introduce to a number of college classrooms, to really prioritize training people in science communication, but not just the dumbing things down and making it simple. It's giving people these tools to be better consumers and navigators of these information ecosystems.
And I would build on that by saying I think the solution to AI and other things is ultimately redefining literacy. We've for centuries taught children how to read. Now we have to teach them how to understand information, its source, why it's credible or not. I think the solution lies in the next generations. I think my generation is lost. We're the biggest spreaders of misinformation in the world. Boomers are the worst because we have no critical skills. We weren't raised with this. But my kids, my grandkids, they're way smarter about this. And they're going to get smarter, and we have to give them the tools to defend themselves. I think they're not going to use AI the way we use it today. They're going to use it very sparingly, and they doubt it. Younger people are really, blocking access to their social media. They're rejecting social media. So I think that's the hopeful thing for me, is the young people are behaving differently, and we have to keep giving them the tools to be able to do that, to fight back.
Yeah, and I completely agree. I don't have all the solutions, but I think what everybody has said here today is spot on, and such a great question. I think AI is here. It's here to stay. It's evolving at a rate that we can't keep up with, and certainly our kids need to be taught not only how to navigate AI, but I think we got to go back to basics. I like this idea of expanding what we mean by literacy. And I think critical thinking is at risk in the era of AI, because it's doing the thinking and the analyzing for us and for our kids. And so I think we really have to get in early into schools, elementary schools, kids, And we need to teach them. These tools are here, and they can be used for good in some senses. It's not all bad. But I think we need to get in there early, and we need to start teaching them critical thinking skills and how to navigate through the use of these tools and how, like you said, inoculation. Some really nice studies coming out of the University of Cambridge and others, pre-bunking interventions, and on a population health level, the effect sizes are pretty nice. So I think we just need to see more of these.
And they're doing that in Scandinavian countries.
Yeah.
They're doing
Finland.
it in second, third grade.
Amazing. Yeah,
Yes.
exactly.
Yeah.
So we need to change the curriculum. Need to update.
And I'm told that we are at time, so if you have any additional questions, you can find our panelists at the networking session that will happen in a little while. But yes. But before we do that, Joanne will be coming in with a couple of our panelists to do a wrap-up of the day. But I just wanted to thank you so much for your insights. This was such an excellent panel. Thank you again for being here.
Thank you so much.